Hello, I'm Michael, and if you're here, it's because you're as attracted to fear as I am. Marie and her husband Jean had planned their dream vacation. They chose a secluded resort in the south of France, known for its lush beauty and the tranquility it offered. The place, an old restored castle, was surrounded by green fields, vineyards and mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The idea was to relax, escape the stresses of everyday life, and finally find some peace. But something wasn't right from the moment they arrived. The place seemed perfect at first glance, but there was a strange feeling in the air, something Jean couldn't quite place. Marie, on the other hand, was delighted. The hotel, with its medieval architecture and elegant decor, exuded charm and history. However, soon the quirks began to pile up. Shortly after checking in, the receptionist led them to their room. Along the way, the resort's hallways were nearly deserted. The silence was disturbing. It was as if all the other guests were absent. Maybe it's low season, John thought, but something in her mind kept questioning that fact. As they settled in, Marie was fascinated by an old painting that adorned the hallway wall. It seemed to depict an important moment in local history. A woman and a child, both with dark, melancholy expressions. Something about the woman's eyes in the painting made Marie shiver. "It's just a painting," she said to herself, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. On the first night, after a quiet dinner, the two retired to their quarters. But when the lights went out and silence took over, Marie heard something strange coming from the hallway. A low murmur, as if someone was whispering. But when he got up to check, no one was there. She went back to bed, trying to ignore what had happened, but the feeling that something was wrong never left her. However, it was the next morning that things really started to change. The hotel seemed even emptier, if that was possible. Only one employee showed up to serve breakfast, and she seemed nervous, almost rushed. "Just ignore the rumors about the place," she said quickly before hurrying to leave. The phrase kept echoing in Marie's head. "What rumors?" Marie asked, but the employee had already disappeared. The weather, which had previously seemed idyllic, now had an unsettling feel. It was as if the resort was keeping a dark secret, something no one dared to talk about. Marie and Jean began to notice strange little things, objects that seemed to move on their own, doors that locked without explanation, and the feeling of being watched. When they explored the resort's surroundings, Jean found an old chapel hidden behind dense trees. Inside, the candles were lit, but there was no one there. Marie insisted they return to the safety of the hotel, but as the sun set, a growing sense of unease came over them. Something was about to happen, something that would change their vacation and their lives forever. In the following days, the strangeness at the resort only increased. The feeling of isolation was present in every corner. Marie and Jean, although initially enchanted by the place, began to feel like intruders in a space that seemed to belong to no one. The receptionist and cafe employee were increasingly evasive, and the other guests, if there were any, seemed to avoid direct contact. It was on a rainy afternoon that Jean decided to investigate the hotel alone. He felt restless and wanted to discover the source of the disturbing feeling that accompanied him. When Marie suggested that perhaps it would be best to relax and enjoy the time there, he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. This wasn't just any ordinary resort. Jean began exploring areas of the hotel that he had previously avoided. In the hallways, he found locked doors that shouldn't be. One of them led to an outbuilding at the back, a part of the castle that looked like it had been neglected for years. When he managed to break down the door and enter, he found a cluttered room with furniture covered in white sheets and dusty objects, as if time had stopped there. But it was something in the corner of the room that caught his attention. A table with a series of old letters, some from dates so remote that the paper was yellowed. Jean, curious, started leafing through them and found a mysterious correspondence. The letters talked about a tragic event that occurred decades earlier, involving an unexplained accident that killed several members of a family living at the resort. The strangest thing was the repeated mention of a woman's name, Isabelle. Something about the way the name was written with so much affection and at the same time a tone of despair made Jean get a lump in her throat. Jean began to put the pieces together. He knew something very bad had happened there. However, the pressure of secrecy seemed to envelop the entire place. When he returned to his room, he tried to talk to Marie about what he had found, but she was visibly nervous. She mentioned that during the time he was away, she felt a strange presence at her bedroom window. "I saw something, Jean," she said, eyes wide. "It was a woman. I don't know how to explain it, but she was looking at me." The two began to realize that they were no longer alone. During the night, the feeling of observation increased. Furthermore, a constant feeling of cold seemed to accompany any movement within the hotel. Marie tried to find comfort in the little things, but the fear grew by the hour. The tension between the two grew as Jean wanted to find out more about what had happened there, while Marie was increasingly desperate to leave. However, there was something keeping them at the resort, something invisible and imposing. They couldn't get out, as if the place was somehow holding them back. It was then that signs began to appear that they were being followed. At night, footsteps echoed through the hallways, but when they checked, no one was there. Again, Isabelle's name resonated in his mind, and Jean began to investigate deeper. In the hotel library, he found more documents, including a series of old photographs of the family that had lived in the castle. The woman Jean had seen in the photos was Isabelle, and her look in the images was identical to what he had felt, intense, direct, as if she were trying to warn him of something. In the last photo, Isabelle was next to a child, but what caught Jean's attention most was the dark shadow that was projected behind her, something that seemed to be moving. Desperate to understand what was happening, Jean returned to the chapel they had found earlier. There, he discovered yet another clue, an inscription on a hidden wall that read, "Whoever invokes the past will suffer the consequences." From that moment on, fear became a palpable presence. They were playing a game they didn't understand, and the resort's past was unearthing itself in sinister ways. The weather at the resort became unbearable. Jean and Marie were increasingly isolated, and the fear that spread throughout the place consumed them. They could no longer trust what they saw, what they heard, or even what they felt. Every time they approached a corner of the hotel, the feeling that something was about to happen, something terrible, swallowed them deeper. The place's past seemed to be present in a way as concrete as the air they breathed. One morning, Marie woke up with a strange feeling. The room was freezing, and when he looked to the side, Jean wasn't in bed. Desperation set in instantly. She went looking for him, calling his name in a low voice, but the silence of the hotel swallowed her. As he passed through the hallway door, something caught his attention. One of the back doors was open. It was the entrance to the annex that Jean had explored, the place where he had found the old letters. Marie, with her heart pounding, headed there. As she walked through the dark, cold corridors, a weight grew on her. It felt like the walls were breathing, that the hotel itself was alive, watching your every step. At the end of the hallway, she saw the faint light of a lit candle coming from a half-open door, the same door that Jean had opened weeks ago. With shaking hands, Marie pushed the door open and entered. What she saw made her freeze in place. Jean was there, but he wasn't alone. In front of him, on a makeshift altar, stood a woman, visibly old and disfigured, with disheveled white hair and an empty look. She whispered incomprehensible words while gesturing towards a black candle. "Jean!" Marie shouted, but he didn't hear her. He was completely absorbed in the ritual, as if in a trance. The sound of a low, almost demonic laugh echoed off the walls of the room. The woman in front of Jean slowly turned around. The face that had previously seemed disfigured was now clearly that of Isabelle, the same woman from the old photographs. Her eyes were empty, but her smile was unmistakable, and when she looked at Marie, a chill ran down her spine. "You invoked the past, dear." Isabelle's voice resounded like a distant echo. "Now, What has been sealed will be released. Marie tried to pull Jean back, but he was as if in a trance, and an invisible force seemed to hold him at the altar. Fear took over her. The woman in front of Jean began to sing a strange melody, and little by little, the atmosphere around them became more and more oppressive. The house seemed to shake as if it was reacting to the summons. Suddenly, the annex door closed with a bang, and Marie found herself trapped. The black candle burned with a blue flame, and the surroundings began to transform. The air became thicker, and shadowy figures began to appear on the walls, as if they were being projected by the darkness. It was as if the past, the ghosts, the souls of the accident victims that Jean had discovered in the letters were now free, and their faces, distorted by pain and hatred, appeared in the shadows. Isabelle advanced slowly, and the shadows followed her, taking shape as they approached Marie. The feeling of death was imminent. "Now you will be part of our story," Isabelle said, her voice growing stronger, like an echo that multiplied until the words became distorted. In a desperate impulse, Marie grabbed one of the candles and, with all her strength, threw it towards Isabelle. The candle broke when it hit the altar, and an explosion of light filled the room. The heat was so intense that Marie was thrown backwards, falling to the ground. When he got up, the scene had changed. The annex was empty. Jean was no longer there. The woman had disappeared. All that was left were the shadow marks on the walls and the feeling of an unbearable weight in the air. The sound of her own footsteps echoed through the empty hallways as Marie tried to stand up, still dizzy and scared from what she had just experienced. His heart was beating wildly, but there was no time to hesitate. Jean was gone, and she was alone, lost in a place that seemed no longer real. The air was thick with the feeling that the resort had become a living maze, and Marie didn't know where to start. She had no choice but to search for answers. Every movement felt heavy, as if the environment itself was resisting his presence. Marie knew that something profound and immeasurable was happening there, something beyond the supernatural. The resort was not just an abandoned and cursed place. He was a prison, a trap that had captured those who dared call upon the past. As she moved through the dark corridors, Marie felt a warmth that came not from the candle, but from something more visceral, something rooted in the very spirit of the place. She was drawn to the library, where Jean had found the old letters and photos. Fear and pain were present on every page he had read, but now she knew that what he had discovered was not just an unsolved mystery. It was a tragedy, a weight accumulated over the years, waiting to be released. She remembered the words of the receptionist, who had earlier hurried to ask them to ignore the rumors about the place. And now she understood the true meaning of it. It wasn't just a warning about ghost stories. It was a warning about the curse that still haunted that castle. They had summoned something much deeper, much more real than they imagined. Marie felt Jean's presence again, like an invisible force, but one blending with the winds and echoes of the castle. He was there somehow, somewhere, lost between the past and the present. She needed to find him, but she knew her journey now wouldn't be easy. To face him, she would have to understand what was really happening at the resort. It was then that she heard a soft voice coming from a far corner of the library. "You don't understand, do you?" the voice whispered, full of sadness. When Marie turned around, there was no one there, but the feeling of being watched intensified. The voice seemed to echo inside his mind. "You can't escape what happened here. Our destinies are intertwined." Marie's mind was filled with confusion. "Who's talking?" she shouted, but there was no response. The library, once silent, was now filled with murmurs and sighs, as if the pages of the books themselves were breathing. She ran towards the stairs that led underground, the place where she felt all the answers were hidden. The place seemed older than the rest of the resort, as if it had been avoided by everyone who had passed through over the years. With each step I descended, the air became heavier, denser. The darkness seemed to swallow every part of her. When he reached the bottom, he found an iron door covered in moss and corroded by time. The handle was broken, But as she pushed the door with all her strength, she entered. The room was cold and empty, but something made her stop. In the center of the room was an antique mirror, framed by gold filigrees that were faded and rusty. The surface of the mirror was cloudy, but as Marie got closer, she saw a reflection that was not her own. It was Jean, looking at her with empty, lost eyes. He was there, but he wasn't really there. "Jean," Marie whispered, her voice breaking. "You shouldn't have come," Jean's reflection responded, her voice distorted and dark. "Now you're part of the game too. You can't escape." The mirror then lit up, and the room around Marie began to spin, as if she were being sucked into it. A feeling of hopelessness took over her. "No, please!" she screamed, trying to pull away, but the force was too much. That was when she remembered Isabelle's words, the warning about the past that needed to be faced. "Releasing the past," she murmured. That was it. The only way to break the curse was to confront the mistakes made by those who had died there. Marie took a step forward, looking deeply into the mirror as she felt her breathing quicken. With a purposeful movement, she touched the surface of the mirror. A wave of light enveloped her, and the room shook violently. Reality began to distort, and Marie had a vision. She saw the accident that had happened at the resort decades before, the fire that destroyed part of the castle, the tragedy that killed an entire family, and in the midst of the destruction, a figure appeared, Isabelle. She had been responsible for causing the death, and now her spirit was trapped in a prison created by her own guilt. Marie knew what she needed to do. She needed to free those souls, help them find peace, and in doing so, she would also free Jean. The room around Marie continued to spin, the mirror reflecting more than she ever thought possible. Every image, every memory from the past was there, vibrating on the surface. She was no longer just looking into a mirror. She was immersed in the very fabric of time, reliving the hell that had unfolded there. The burning castle, the muffled screams, the pain and despair. Everything was happening before her eyes, and she was beginning to understand the magnitude of the tragedy. The mirror became a window to the past, and in the background of the distorted image, Marie saw Isabelle. She was no longer just reflected on the surface. Now Isabelle stood before her like a ghost, her ethereal figure floating towards Marie. "You can't understand, can you?" Isabelle spoke in a low, pained voice, as if every word was an echo of her own guilt. "I was the cause of all this. The fire, the death, everything was in my hands." Marie tried to move away, but couldn't. She was trapped in that vision, unable to escape. You can break free," she said, fighting the fear that was paralyzing her. "You can let it go. You don't have to carry it anymore." But Isabelle laughed, a bitter, desperate laugh. "I am part of what this place has become. The castle imprisoned me, made me live in an endless cycle of regret. If you don't do what must be done, all of us will be lost here forever." The word lost reverberated like a blow to Marie. She knew that the only way to break the cycle was to face the truth, to face the past that terrified her so much. The souls that were trapped there could not be freed if the resort itself was not destroyed, if the curse was not broken once and for all. I can't do this alone," Marie said, feeling a deep sadness. "I need Jean. Where is he?" Isabelle looked at her, her eyes dark and empty. "He's not lost. He's here, along with all of us. But he can't leave. No one can, until the curse is broken." Isabelle's words left an impression on her, and it was then that Marie understood the sacrifice necessary. She needed to destroy what was left of the resort, free the souls trapped there, including Jean, and she would need to do it before it was too late. The mirror distorted even more, and the air around Marie grew heavier. She felt a tug in her chest, an inexplicable force trying to hold her in place. The castle began to shake as if it were falling apart. The shadows began to move faster, angrier, as if they knew the destruction was about to begin. With fierce determination, Marie approached the mirror and with all her strength hit it with her hands. The surface shattered with a deafening crack, and a wave of energy coursed through his body. The shadows that were once trapped within the distorted reality now dissipated, as if time itself was twisted and the castle began to disintegrate. Marie fell to her knees, feeling the energy draining from her body. She looked around, seeing the castle crumbling, the walls creaking and cracking as if the weight of years of suffering were finally being released. One last vision appeared before her. Jean. He was there, but now he was a spirit, a quiet, serene presence. He smiled at her, and in his eyes there was a peace she never imagined he could find. "You did what no one else could do," he said softly. "Now, we are free." Marie smiled, tears falling down her face as she watched the castle crumble around them. She had faced evil, the past, and now it was fading, swept away by the destruction of what had once been the resort. "Jean, I don't know what to do now," she whispered, still scared, but filled with an unexpected lightness. "You've done enough," he replied, his voice becoming a gentle breeze. "Now, it's time to go." The castle finally collapsed, and Marie, enveloped in the soft light of dawn, found herself alone. She was back in the real world, next to the road where the resort had once been. The place was completely erased, as if it had never existed. What remained was only the memory of an epic struggle, a struggle to save not only the lost souls, but also his own. But as she looked toward the horizon, Marie knew the cycle was broken. Evil had been defeated, but the memory of what she faced would remain with her forever. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, its warm golden colors illuminating the landscape around Marie. She was alone, standing in front of what was once the resort, now nothing more than an empty, desolate expanse of land. There were no traces of what had happened there, nor of his presence or that of any other soul. The place, which for so long had been a field of suffering and mystery, now seemed to fade away like a nightmare at dawn. Marie took a deep breath, taking in the tranquility around her. She knew the cycle was complete. The castle that had, for so long, stood as a symbol of fear and tragedy, had now been consumed by the very destruction it had caused. And the lost souls, those who had been tormented by guilt and suffering, were finally at peace. The truth had been revealed, and the past, however dark it was, had been set free, but the empty feeling still lingered in his chest. What she had experienced at the resort would not be something easy to forget. The memories of Jean, the distorted faces of all the victims, the echo of the curse, all of it would remain with her. There was a peace now, but also a deep scar. The terror she had experienced could not be erased by a simple happy ending. It was a mark on his soul, a reminder that evil, when awakened, can destroy not only the places we touch, but also the very pieces of ourselves. As she walked along the road that led back to the nearest town, Marie allowed herself a moment of reflection. What she had faced was not just a struggle against the supernatural or the revenge of a lost spirit. It was a journey to understand the weight of guilt, responsibility, and most of all, the cost of truth. Sometimes the answers we seek come with a price, and the price she paid was the loss of Jean, of her love, of her companionship, but also of her own soul, which, in some ways, had been scarred by the experience. However, there was something that kept her firm, something inside her that knew that despite the horror, had emerged stronger. She had faced her fear head-on, destroyed what threatened to devour those around her, and brought the truth to light, however painful it was. Marie looked up at the sky, the sun now shining brightly. She was free, free to move on, free to continue her life despite the pain and terror she had experienced. But at the same time, I knew that terror would never completely go away. The memory of Isabelle, of Jean, of the resort itself would continue to accompany her in her thoughts. They weren't completely lost. Somehow, they were always there, lurking. And then, as the wind blew gently, Marie took her last step toward the road. Life would go on, but the shadow of what she had experienced would never be completely erased. She knew that if she ever looked back again, the resort would be there, not physically, but as a memory, as a dark warning that certain mysteries never truly go away. What remained now was peace, but a peace tempered by the memory of what had been faced, the truth that had been revealed, and the price she had paid to do so.